Shabbat Shalom. Cast your mind back a few thousand years to the ancient Olympic Games. I can guarantee you that there were no Jews participating. That was because we weren't allowed to participate in the ancient Olympic Games. It was Greek only. But perhaps you're thinking, well, yes, eventually though, as the Greek Empire spread under Alexander the Great, so great, maybe then as Hellenism was spread, then we could participate. Indeed, we could. We know from the book of Maccabees that when they built the gymnasiums in Jerusalem, that Jews were welcome to participate provided they left their Judaism at the door, stripped naked, and really tried to undo that embarrassing stigma of being circumcised. Again, we were not really welcome as ourselves. We were only welcomed if we hid who we were and adopted the Hellenistic manner of exercise. But I can also tell you that had we been invited to those earlier Olympic Games, Judaism would have told you not to go. The Olympic Games, as they were originally held, were a pretty much no-holds-bar bloodfest for sporting victory. There were no bronze or silver medals. It was gold or bust, and many athletes killed themselves or their opponents in order to be able to get that gold medal, to have that wreath, to be the one to wear the garland and to claim victory. And Judaism has never really felt it appropriate to kill yourself or someone else just for that status of having won an athletic competition. But that's the ancient world. Thankfully, in the modern times, we have completely redone the Olympic spirit, have we not? Well, let's talk about the ideal, right? The Olympic ideal, something that has been touted since the Olympics were reconceived in the 1800s and brought back into the modern world in their current form. The Olympic ideal essentially rests on a few pillars. One is the fellowship of all nations. That all nations should be able to come together in an athletic competition where national, pride might still be present, but national chauvinism would not be. That instead, we would recognize that all were welcome to compete together, and all of the old rivalries would be put aside for at least a short period of time. Well, that worked out perfectly in 1936, didn't it? 1936, of course, is being one of the most famous Olympics in the modern era because it was the Olympics held in Berlin. In the shadow of the war, but more importantly for our discussion today, in not the shadow, but in the midst of the deepest darkness of the anti-Semitism of the Nazi regime. So while it was true that many people were wondering whether this Hitler fellow had designs outside the borders of Germany, would he go to war or not, certainly that was a topic of discussion. Within his own borders, the war against Jews, other minorities, and undesirables had already begun. And indeed, one of the topics among the IOC was how do we make it look like hosting the games in Germany is not exactly saying that his anti-Semitic regime is okay in its anti-Semitism. Because after all, the Germans had decided that no Jews would compete from Germany in the Olympic Games. And that made the IOC a little uncomfortable. It's okay, they sent some of their heavy hitters in, and they were able to get paper promises that no, Germany really wasn't going to be doing that. The games could go ahead, and of course, Jews were not allowed to compete for the Nazi team. Big surprise, but the fig leaf seemed to work. And Hitler was able to have his propaganda spectacle. He was able to show the world that indeed he was open to the fellowship of nations, just not the Jews, and a few other minorities and undesirables. Was that what the Olympics were meant to be in the modern world? Were they meant to be a propaganda piece in order to showcase one nation's superiority, or, in Hitler's case, to showcase the inferiority of others? Well, no, that wasn't what the stated goal was of the original modern Olympics, but it did seem to go along just fine with what the Olympic organizers wanted at that particular time. They were desperate to make sure that the Olympics would continue, and they knew they needed Germany and a fig leaf to make that happen. So perhaps the Olympic ideal of the Fellowship of Nations has had some stains over the generations. But surely we can see the Olympics as an instrument of peace, as it was intended to be, building upon the myth that there were no wars during the Olympics in ancient Greece. The Olympic committees believed that the establishment of free competition among nations would replace the need for military enterprise to show the superiority of a country. That France would not need to invade England if they could just thrash them on the athletics field. And this would then allow the outlet of the natural competitiveness of humanity through a more constructive channel than bullets and bombs. Well, again, that didn't seem to actually work out all that well. After all, from the time the Olympics were invented, we ended up with 2 world wars and a lot of other casualties around the world. Oftentimes, many countries will come to the Olympics in the midst of combat against one another, although there were hiatuses for both World War I and II. And if we want to look at the long peace, relative as it is to history, that took place after World War II, I think we can give more credit to nuclear bombs for maintaining a lack of world wars than we can for the athleticism of the Olympic competition. But we can't deny, can we, the original Olympic ideal there in the 19th century of human excellence, of allowing human excellence to rise up, to show the beauty, the amazing talent of humanity, to be an inspiring symbol for all of us. Well, again, going back to the 19th century, human excellence, of course, meant that you could not have been tainted by having been paid to do your athleticism, because any competition that was based off profit surely made it less than noble and was not truly about human excellence. It was just about greed. And so the early days of strict amateurism, which stripped Jim Thorpe of his well-deserved medals, well, it was really only open to those who could afford to train fastidiously without getting paid for that effort, which meant that the early Olympics were the playground of the well-to-do leisure class throughout Europe. Yes, there might be the occasional story of the plucky youngster who grew up practicing only in the fields outside their barn or in some of the rundown, shabby areas inside the inner cities, and they too could make Olympic gold. But if you go back through the history of Olympic winners and you look at the economic status or the government funding provided to them, you will find that the true stories of the hard scrabble, pull yourself up by the bootstraps Olympic victors are very far and few between. The few movies or TV shows you might have seen have either exaggerated them or been the only examples of that. And instead, the other thousands and thousands of medals have gone to those who were either independently wealthy or had the support of their national economic efforts behind them to make sure that they could actually be a full-time athlete of Olympic caliber. Now, you might be thinking, well, Rabbi really is really trashing on the Olympics. This isn't nice. We just started the Olympics. What's his beef? Well, my beef is that we have a myth, we have a narrative, we have a symbolism of the Olympics that is beautiful and that is wonderful. And yet we seem to be unwilling to actually look the reality in its face. It is as though the myth is so perfect that we dare not actually examine it for fear that it would fall apart and then we would be left with nothing. But that is really the way of cowards. If there is a myth or an ideal that is inspiring, the idea of the true fellowship of all nations, including all the peoples of all those nations, if that is truly inspiring to us, if we get that wonderful, warm feeling to imagine all of humanity and all of its diversity, both national, ethnic, religious, and all of its complexity, can come together and enjoy such things as the sports of the Olympics, well, then we shouldn't settle if that isn't happening. We should demand that that indeed be the way the Olympics are run, that we do find a way to bring all people together, and we find ways to punish those nations that refuse to allow all people to come together. That if nations continue to discriminate against their own population, refuse to allow them to compete or to participate in the athletic efforts, then those nations should not be allowed onto the same field with other nations who truly celebrate the freedom of humanity. Likewise, if we are going to say that the Olympics should be an outlet for competition that doesn't involve bloodshed, then we need to look seriously at those countries which, while having amazing ability to throw a discus, also throw bombs into each other's houses, also throw bombs into those innocents on the other side of a border at which they are trying to acquire, not because of self-defense, not because of the desperate need to protect their own country, but simply because they either hate their neighbors or they want what their neighbors have. Those do not live up to the Olympic ideal. Why should they make a mockery? Why should they make hypocrisy of the competition which is meant to be peaceful? And likewise, human excellence. I am a firm believer in human excellence in all of its form, whether it be artistic, whether it be intellectual, whether it be athletic, whether it be professional, all of the ways that humans can excel and show the unique abilities of our species should be celebrated and lauded. And in the Olympics, when athleticism is at the forefront, we need to make sure that everybody who has an athletic dream, who has athletic potential, has a path forward. It should not be the purview only of the leisure class. It should not only be the purview of those who have received some form of special dispensation from their countries in order to dare to have this dream. It should certainly not be something that is celebrated when some people are forced into athletic servitude as a way of bringing glory and gold to their countries. This needs to be examined, regulated, and protected if we are going to call it true human excellence. I believe in the Olympics, and I thrill when I hear the stories of what truly the Olympics are meant to represent. But we can't be so shy as to pretend like that is the norm. And we can't be so shy as to refrain from criticism for fear of disturbing the Olympic pure ideal. All that is worthy is worth criticism. All that is noble demands inspection to maintain its nobility. We cannot simply rely upon the myth and the narrative to protect what the Olympics are meant to be, or they will continue to degrade, and they will continue to degrade others. The Olympics are a perfect opportunity to live up to the ideals of Judaism that God has wanted us to see, that all of us are created in the image of God, that all of us have been endowed with abilities that are worthy of celebration and that are worthy of improvement. But it only happens if we hold organizations like the IOC accountable for how they run these activities. If it is worthwhile, it will withstand the scrutiny. And if it cannot withstand the scrutiny, then it needs to be fixed until it can be worthwhile again. Shabbat Shalom. I will point out as a coda that that general rule of thumb, that if something is worthwhile, it is worth scrutinizing, and if it is not living up to that scrutiny, then it's worth repairing. Well, that goes for things other than just the Olympics. So anything that inspires you in life, whether it be your community, whether it be your city, whether it be your country, whether it be your job, is always subject to that same general practice. Everything that is noble in life needs to be criticized when necessary to maintain its nobility.